My name is Dennis Campbell. I'm a principal owner of Crystal Creek Enterprises here in DeWitt. And my grandfather was one of the first customers of Twin State Liqui-Grow here in DeWitt in the late 60s. So we are actually third generation customers of Liqui-Grow.
Hi, I'm Joe Derricks, and I've been with Liqui-Grow on and off probably for 30 plus years.
I'm Kent Bennis. I've worked with Liqui-Grow for 23 years. I'm a second generation Liqui-Grow user. My father worked with Liqui-Grow before I did for a number of years, so we've enjoyed working with Liqui-Grow for many years.
So Liqui-Grow helps my farming operation move forward in the fact that they have good technical advisors in Dr. Jake and Dave Audi and Abe. Really, it's the people. Flat out, it's the people that move my business forward because they are the expertise that I need to be a better farmer.
Very flexible in their schedule and with their outstanding people and equipment. So convenience, flexibility, and the service that they bring to our operation is critical in what we do as we try to grow corn and soybeans here. We can make one phone call and next year's fertilizer plans are taken care of. So to us, that's really important as we're trying to finish up harvest and work through a lot of the other activities in the fall. We know that when we make that call to Liqui-Grow, it's covered, and that's off of our plate.
The communication between all their employees, with their salespeople, with their agronomy staff and the applicators, they understand my operation and tailor programs and agronomics that I feel are hard to find other places.
If I have a problem, boom, they're there immediately. They got somebody coming over, they got a pump coming over, they got products. If I have a question, they have knowledge to answer the questions. It's a whole total package.
The loadout facilities that they have here in DeWitt are outstanding, and they allow us to take our trucks and pull full semi-loads out and get those out to our planters and get back here in a timely fashion. So for us, that's really important to keep those planters moving in the springtime, and it's great to have that confidence that we know that we will be able to do that on a daily basis. We think the exchanges and returns and the service that Liqui-Grow brings to our operation is really critical. We grow seed corn, and so things can change on a dime. The products that we may use and the fields that we may spray, we may have a couple hours to make those decisions and get the products in hand. So the ability to come here or make that phone call and say, hey, things have changed, we've got to take this insecticide and switch it out for a different brand, or we've got to change fungicides because of hybrid issues or bug infestations, really gives us, again, that confidence to make the call to Liqui-Grow and work with them on that selection of products.
I use liquid fertilizer suspension for a couple different reasons. One of the main ones is I like the targeted placement. I like the banded application. So with today's hybrids and varieties, sometimes you've got hybrids and varieties with better root systems. Some maybe not as much, but they still have terrific yield potential. And by banding that fertilizer, we're allowing that plant to seek out, tap into that banded fertilizer in a more efficient way. The other piece I like is that I can put in the micronutrients, particularly sulfur, in a much more efficient manner. When you look at other different fertilizer systems, incorporating the sulfur and the micros is very difficult. It can cause a lot of what I've seen is compatibility problems if you try and mix it with herbicides. So I'm able to do it in a band with Liqui-Grow, which makes it a lot more efficient, and I feel like the placement of those and then the ability for the plant to extract it from the soil is much better that way.
The reason we do is because of the consistency, and basically from Liqui-Grow we feel like we get the most consistent, uniform product from beginning to end, from the full tank to the end of the tank, so that when we're spreading fertilizer, that analysis that we ordered is going on every acre from the full point to the empty point, and that's important to our operations success, period.
We like that dribble band application that Liqui-Grow offers because it allows the roots to follow down that concentrated band and find the fertility that it needs to maximize yields for us. We like the accuracy of that placement. So we know that even though the winds may be blowing out there in the fall as we're in the combines trying to finish up harvest, we can have Liqui-Grow out there putting on that dribble band and making sure that it's going to be the right product at the right time in the right place. We think that's really important to us. We also like the liquid suspension fertilizer for the ease of being able to add the micronutrients to it on a field-by-field basis or on a crop-by-crop basis. So the flexibility that that liquid suspension adds to our operation to make those decisions with a corn-on-corn field, a seed corn field, or a soybean field, field by field, based on the soil types and the soil test results, really makes a difference to us.
What I look for in a business partnership is someone that wants to have mutual benefit to both parties when we're doing business. Not every time does somebody win out. You know, so there is winners and losers in these types of situations, and it can't always be one-sided. And I feel like Liqui-Grow always tries to, look at that from both sides of the table. And I've always felt that they always will work with me, whether it's to their benefit or my benefit. We've always had a great business partnership year in and year out when it came to good times and bad times throughout the different years.
High service level, a commitment to have the people and the equipment out there in the same relative working time frame that we are. They work weekends. Liqui-Grow is wonderful for being open early in the mornings and late in the evenings when the business of agriculture happens in those busy seasons. And that means a lot to us.
I look for partnerships that will help me move my family farm forward, basically. So I want to leave my ground in better condition than when I started. I want to leave my farm to hopefully a son or a daughter that wants to farm with me, and I need to have a successful foundation for them, and Liqui-Grow helps me achieve that through the expertise they have in agronomy and in their competitive prices, and really it's the whole ball of wax there.
Well, I'm loyal to Liqui-Grow because they've brought value to my business every year. I know if there's ever been an issue, they've helped work through the issue.
First of all, it's to the people. The people that I deal with in Liqui-Grow are, they're worried about how my operation is doing. If I'm successful, they can be successful.
So what I feel Liqui-Grow brings to my operation that's different than other suppliers is, it's a locally family-owned business, that they understand, the plight of the local grower. I know who the owners are. I feel like they've got their employees, their customers' best interest in mind when it comes to doing business. And I feel really comfortable that if I place money with these guys, not going to be issues down the road, making sure that product gets to my farm, in a very efficient, and professional manner.
The convenience of having a Liqui-Grow, within a half an hour's drive of any farm that I have. Why, if I need something, if I run short, if I have a question, boom, I can either get an answer right away or somebody's out there helping me fix something. So it's a combination of everything.
First and foremost, we think it's really about the professionalism and the trust that the employees here have, and we have the confidence in their ability to make things happen when we need it done. So weather can get really crazy in the fall. We're still trying to finish up harvest. We may be still working on some seed corn acres, and we're still starting to start the tillage operations and cover crops. So we know that when we can call Liqui-Grow and have a quality job done very quickly, if the weather's changing on us, we think that that's really important to our operation. So it's about the professionalism, and it's about the trust that we have in the people and the equipment that they have here. We're also pleased with the relationship with Liqui-Grow because it's been such a long-standing relationship for us that we've got the confidence in their financial strength and their ability to recommend products to us based on what we need.
Good morning. Welcome to the Liqui-Grow Lead Academy sessions. We're happy you can join us today. We hope to see you at the rest of our sessions, which air next week. We have 2 final sessions next week on Tuesday and Thursday. Excellent live panel discussions. They will be shot live. You will be able to send in questions throughout the entire time. So make sure you put Tuesday and Thursday on your schedule. We also have a full schedule on our website, and it'll be posted at the end of this session, but those are next Tuesday and Thursday at 9 a.m. In addition, the Lead Academy sessions qualify for CCA credits. There is a link listed so you can self-report the training. There's also a QR code that will be shown during the Q&A, so you can just use your phone to scan it if that's easier. We hope you enjoy this exciting presentation on maximizing profitable soybean yields. At the end of the presentation, we will have Q&A with our presenters, Dr. Jake Bossenkemper and the Liqui-Grow Seed and Seed Treatment Manager, Katie Hess. You can submit questions at any point throughout the session by either posting them in the YouTube chat, or you can send questions by email to questions@liqui-grow.com. We hope you enjoy the presentation, and we'll see you afterwards for Q&A.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jake Bossenkemper, agronomy lead with Liqui-Grow.
Hi, I'm Katie Hess, the seed lead here at Liqui-Grow. Jake, we have been halfway through our webinars already. Can you believe it?
I cannot. It's went quickly, Katie.
Boy, we've had some really good talks so far with carbon credits, short corn, rutworm, everything you've provided so far. This has been great. Hopefully the folks out there have enjoyed it.
Yeah, you bet, you bet. And I think we're going to talk about soybean today, aren't we?
We are. So we're going to talk about high yields and still making a profit in soybeans. Jake and I are in a lot of combines all fall long, and we always seem to get the same comment from farmers. Man, I wish these beans would just yield a little bit more. So today we're going to go through some lists of things that we can do to help get to that higher yield so that we're happier when we're in the combines this next fall.
When a farmer asks, Katie, how do I increase yields? Well, I would give a very generic response by saying you have to think of soybean as a solar collector. You really do have to think of that soybean crop as a giant solar panel out there, and the longer you can collect sunshine, the higher you're going to push yields. So the length and duration in which you can collect sunshine and turn it into sugar and turn it into protein and carbohydrates, which is grain, is how you're going to increase soybean yield.
So Jake, let's go through this list of soybean yield factors.
Yeah, you bet, Katie. So I think we always have to keep in mind that the longer we can extend that reproductive phase and the longer we can keep those solar collectors out there, the higher the yield's going to go. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, foundationally, the first step you have to use to extend the reproductive period and optimize grain yield is you have to get the crop planted timely. Okay, and we know through a lot of research that soybean planting date has become more and more and more important
to increase
yields. That's absolutely correct, okay?
Right.
And part of the trick, Katie, to getting a long reproductive phase and higher grain yields is getting those soybeans to flower early.
Okay.
The common mantra for years and years and years and years is soybeans don't flower until after the 21st of June. Well, that's actually no longer true. It was at one time, but as soybean breeders have been breeding for high yields, they've actually bred out some of the photoperiod sensitivity. So today's soybean actually are not as photoperiod sensitive as soybeans of 20, 30, 40 years ago. So they will flower before June 21st today.
I have noticed that as I've been out scouting fields this last few years. But now, Jake, what I'm hearing is you want these beans to go in the ground sooner. You're not asking us to put them in and make them do the pull or plunge in January or February, though, right?
No. You still have to use common sense. You still have to plant when conditions are fit. And I know, sometimes I feel like talking about planting date is, we plant as soon as we can. And we do, and I get that. But it's so important. If I'm a farmer, I'm thinking about how can I make use of those days when I have days to plant. How can I make use of them as efficiently as possible? Because we get into these periods where we get stuck out for a week or a week and a half or 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, getting some of those soybeans in prior to getting stuck out for 2 weeks is important, right? So every hour, every day counts when conditions are fit to plant.
So we've hit on early planting. So what's next on your checklist, Jake?
Katie, we talked about soybeans being a solar collector, and part of extending that reproductive period in grain yield is planting early, all right? But the other thing we can do is we can pair early planting with full season cultivars, because when you plant early and use a full season cultivar, now you are growing that crop to its maximum. It is going to be out there collecting sunlight as long as you can possibly get it out there. The only thing we have to watch out is we don't get too long a cultivar, so we don't get frosted at the end too. So it's a balance, but
Right.
you definitely don't want to plant a short season cultivar early, soybean variety early, because we actually see that when you plant a short season variety early, you don't get as big a yield increase out of early planting as if you planted a full season variety early. So that's important. I mean, it's a little bit hard to comprehend, but I think if you look at this slide here, it'll make a lot more sense to you. So in this slide here that we're going to show, this was part of my PhD research, and what I did is I measured the flowering duration for a normal planting date as well as an early planting date across a range in maturities. And it was what I found is that with early planting, the duration of flowering continued to increase. So you had a longer flowering period with maturity. But at later planting dates, the varieties basically, regardless of their maturity, flowered the same duration. So again, it's just showing you that planting early paired with full season cultivars is going to maximize that seed setting period, and you're going to create the most potential yield.
So to wrap up, what you're kind of saying here is plant early, push your maturities. So if you're a group 2.5, maybe go 2.8 or so. Plant your fuller varieties first, not your shorter varieties
Correct.
first. Is that what I'm kind of hearing out of all of this?
Absolutely. And I don't think we need to get, I think when I talk about this, sometimes guys get a little crazy on the maturity. I'm not saying that.
Right.
Okay? I'm
But
saying
if you can push it just 1 or 2 days.
that's exactly.
Jake,
Yep.
quick question here. When you're looking at maturities and you go for that 2.5 to 2.6, how many more days does that add on average for harvestability?
About 3.
About 3.
That's what we find. Yep.
so
So, if you
there's-
go, yep. So if you go from a 2.5 to 2.6, you're generally looking about putting 3 more days, before physiological maturity or harvest.
I think that's something that farmers need to really think about as they're picking out varieties for the 2021, 3 more days. So you can kind of push that envelope just a little bit if you can.
And you know what else is interesting? When I did this PhD work, we also measured grain yield accumulation during the seed filling period. And guess what? We accumulated about a half a bushel per day. So you're talking about, going from a 2.7 to 2.8, well, that's a bushel and a half, potentially, right?
Cool. So Jake, okay, let's move on here. What's next on our soybean list?
So, we're going to plant early. We're going to use a mid to full season cultivar to maximize that duration. But we also have to protect the canopy. So what you're doing by planting early is you're developing yield potential.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you're establishing yield. You're establishing the potential for yield. But you also have to make sure that the roots don't get a severe root rot, and therefore you can't take up water or nutrients to support that yield. So that automatically starts making me think about what can we do to protect the root system, to keep it healthy, taking up water, taking up mineral nutrients, and maximizing that yield potential, okay? And so we think about seed treatments, but there's a really classic study that was done by Iowa State not too long ago, and it shows the potential for what can happen if you control all organisms in the soil. So what they did is they actually fumigated the soil, okay? And then they put some different planting dates in that fumigation. And they found that when you fumigated the soil and you removed all pathogens from the soil, early planting really, really, really paid off big time, meaning that early planting became more important. But when you didn't fumigate the soil, early planting wasn't important because the roots were attacked by soybean cyst nematodes, the roots were attacked by fungi. They weren't rooted as well, and therefore they couldn't support the yield that early planting, the yield
Provided
potential
us.
that early planting provided us.
So now you're talking seed treatments at this point. It's
Yep.
kind of what you're getting into.
So practically, what can a farmer do to keep the roots healthy? He can use a seed treatment. right?
Okay, and what's in these seed treatments that you really like today?
Katie, I think that, I think that to boil the conversation down and make it short, that you got to be using, if you're going to spend the time to plant early, you're going to select a full season cultivar, you're going to do everything you can to maximize the duration of the yield potential, you got to be using the newest and the best seed treatment products on the market. Okay, that's what it comes down
Yeah, so we hear a lot of farmers talk to us about, well, I just use this generic fungicide on my seed treatment. I don't need to use your branded stuff. It's the same thing. I don't think that's quite true. And could you possibly maybe tell us why that's not true?
Yeah, so I mean, it's actually, I understand, when a price is laid out in front of you and it says fungicide, insecticide, and a price is laid out in front of you and it says fungicide, insecticide, and you don't know the difference. Of course, you choose the cheaper one, right? But I think it's important to recognize that, a recent Syngenta report stated that the big ag chem manufacturers, when you sum up all the different active ingredients that the big chem manufacturers are testing a year, it's 100,000 compounds a year, right? And they're not doing that for fun. These seed companies are testing all these compounds because they want to find new and improved seed treatment active ingredients that do a better job of protecting roots.
To protect their own products, actually, these days.
To protect their own products and to protect soybean roots and to protect the yield potential that we can create with today's soybean germplasm and planting early, right? Allevo is a classic example of that, right? Allevo has changed the way we think about managing soybean, right? It's really helping out with a bad disease, called SDS, right? Mm-hmm. So they're constantly looking for new active ingredients to help improve these seed treatments. And, a lot of these seed treatments that you're finding on the market that are real cheap, well, guess what? That's old technology now. So in general, I would encourage farmers to be looking for the new and the best and the latest seed treatments to help protect yield.
Jake, I've heard you talk a lot over the years about clethodim versus imidacloprid. Is there one that you favor a little bit more than the other when you're talking the insecticide piece?
Honestly, imidacloprid and clethodim, they're both good insecticides. I'm not saying that, imidacloprid is not a good insecticide, but, if I had to choose, I'm probably going to go with the clethodim. Because I have a lot of experience with clethodim, and I know for a fact, which is Poncho. Poncho has a lot more knockdown power than Gaucho or imidacloprid. It's got a larger pest spectrum, meaning that it's going to control white grub and grape collapses. And imidacloprid or Gaucho, it just doesn't have enough punch to control some of those larger insects that can feed on soybean roots and seeds.
Okay, Jake, so we've talked about the roots and protecting those. So you mentioned earlier that we need to protect the entire canopy on soybeans.
Yeah.
So some professors that I know from University of Illinois, so you should be happy about this, they used to teach us that if you look at the stem and it goes down to the node, that stem and that set of flowers will provide 50% of the energy needed for that pods, and then 25% above and 25% below to the other pods. And so that's why it's a whole systems and keeping the entire plant healthy. Let's talk more about that in-season protection of the canopy.
Yeah, Katie. So if you're going to plant early, use a full season cultivar. You're going to protect the roots with seed treatments so they don't get, clogged up with fungi and can't get water up to them. The bottom line is you're creating all this yield potential and this protection, right? So you're going to have a lot of potential yield, a lot of seeds are going to set, a lot of flowers are going to turn into pods, and you're going to have a lot of yield potential. But to carry that yield through the end of the season, now you got to think about protecting the canopy. You got to keep the canopy in good shape so it can fill out those potential pods and seeds, right? So, what can we do to protect the canopy? The main thing we can do is keep the canopy healthy from funguses and insects, and keep insects from feeding on pods as well, right?
So it's not just fungicide that we should be thinking about, it's also the insects as well at that point.
Correct. No, you should definitely be thinking about the combination or both fungi and fungal diseases as well as insects. So, obviously what can we do about that?
And timing wise on that for fungicide, insecticide?
R3, which is beginning pod, all right? And that's actually pretty important. Research clearly shows if you go before that, like R1 or R2, or you go after that, or R4, you definitely don't see as big a yield increases if you go right at R3. Unless you're targeting white mold, which is kind of a different conversation, but in that case, it's R1, right? So the routine fungicide, insecticide applications, you should be targeting R3. And it's pretty important. So, I would rely on, I would rely on your Liqui-Grow salesman to help you,
Scout those.
understand when
Fields.
is R3 going to happen. 'Cause
Right.
It really is important. I mean, and it shouldn't be.
It is a sweet spot
It
when you're
is.
spraying
It
beans.
is. Yep,
So
yep.
Jake, we've talked about protecting the fungicide insecticide piece, but what we haven't talked about that we talk about a ton in corn is in-season nutrients. Is there anything on the sulfur side for soybeans that you'd like to hit on today for soybeans?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I'm going to tell you a little story here, all right? So not only do we know that sulfur is becoming more important, but I'm going to give you a practical story of why I believe that it's becoming more important for soybean, okay? So as I drive around the countryside, on service calls, going and seeing customers, going with salesmen, you see the sulfur deficiency in these hillsides, these eroded hill slopes in corn. You see it, right? You see it plain as day. Shows up many times throughout the growing season. And I've noticed over the last several years that you also, toward the end of the season, you see yellow soybeans on those same side hills toward the end of the season. And I've seen it in both wet years, I've seen it in dry years. So these yellow top soybeans are one of two things. It's either nitrogen deficiency or it's sulfur deficiency. And because I see the corn is sulfur deficient in these same areas, I think you're seeing sulfur deficiency in soybean there, all right? So I see it when I'm out in the countryside, but we also know that there's a lot less sulfur in the atmosphere than there used to be, all right? And we've got a nice graphical depiction of that here that you can look at. Back in 1986, before the Clean Air Act, there was lots of sulfur being deposited in the atmosphere through coal-fired power plants. Well, during the Clean Air Act, one of the things the EPA did was made coal-fired power plants scrub the sulfur out of the coal because we were having a lot of acid rain, right? Well, not only that, now we have to clean up the sulfur out of the diesel fuel. Basically, we're cleaning up the sulfur out of everything. We've done a really
We've done a really good job
fantastic
of that, haven't we?
That's right, because instead of getting about 16 pounds per acre per year of free sulfur and rain, in eastern Iowa here, now we're really only getting about 4 to 6. So we're not getting a lot of sulfur deposited in rain anymore. And because of that, that's one reason why we're starting to see more consistent responses from sulfur application in soybean. In addition to that, the higher the yield goes, the larger the crop demand. So we've got less sulfur being deposited naturally in the atmosphere, and we've got higher crop demand for sulfur, meaning we need more of it.
So what's your recommendation on this, Jake? I mean, you're talking sulfur. When do you want to apply it? What types of products work best for soybeans?
In soybean, a really good place to add sulfur that doesn't cost anymore, meaning it doesn't cost a trip. You put it in with your spring pre-plant burn down herbicide as a broadcast application. ATS can be used. You got to be a little bit careful with what herbicide you use. ATS doesn't play with every herbicide, but if there's one thing our people are good at, we use a lot of ATS and liquid suspensions for corn, for soybean. We know what herbicides you can and can't use with ammonium thiosulfate, and it's just a couple.
So what kind of rates are you talking? I mean, for units, does
Yeah.
the soybean want for uptake?
10 pounds per acre we find is enough. For corn, we're looking at more like 15 or 20, but 10 pounds per acre, is enough. There was an eight-year study that was done at the Walcott Research Farm, and that's pretty good ground actually. It's pretty decent organic matter, which means that it should have a decent supply of sulfur from the soil. But we saw about a 1.8 bushel yield increase, over about a 7-year study. And, at soybean prices today, that's pretty profitable. You're probably looking at netting about $18 per acre because the sulfur is going to cost you about $6 or $7 an acre for 10 pounds. So,
Jake, I've talked about pre-season, in-season, and then I was wanting to hit on just management and the harvest. So we can't control Mother Nature all year long, but we can kind of control some harvest factors, right? So do you have anything that you'd like to talk about on that?
yeah, so, we know that if we bring soybean into the elevator that's over 13%, we're going to get docked.
Right.
But we don't often realize it. I think we realize it, but we don't realize, how much it can hit us in the pocketbook if we bring in 10%
9 or
moisture
10.
soybean. Yeah,
And how often are we on the farm that they go, well, they've already got to 9 today?
quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
So, I understand that there is a dock if we take in above 13% moisture soybean, But keep in mind that if we take in 10% moisture soybean, we're not getting paid as much either because we're not bringing in the bushels, right? So I think that's really important. You know, I understand timing is timing. It is what it is. But, you know, getting started before they're 13, so the average 13 is where you want to be, right? I mean, that's what you want to try to do in a perfect world.
Okay, Jake, so we know that soybeans are a system approach, and we know that if we do one piece or another, we're probably not going to see the yield. But when we're already looking at high yielding soybeans, by adding more into it, we get a bigger bang for the buck. And I know you work on that a lot. And so tell me about your research from this last year in 2020 on this type of.
Yeah, so historically speaking, Katie, you know, if you were, you know, just to apply a fungicide insecticide and you weren't doing a lot of these other things that we've talked about to really, you know, prop up the yield potentials, you would on average see a 3.5 to a 4.5 bushel yield increase, okay? But if you're to plant early, use full season cultivars, you know, make sure you're using a seed treatment that's going to protect roots as much as possible. You know, you're doing a lot of things to prop up management, using fertilizer, controlling weeds. I think you're going to see a larger, more consistent yield increase out of a fungicide insecticide because, again, you're doing all these things to create yield potential and create flowers and potential seeds. Now you got to protect the canopy, right? So I strongly believe that's the case, right? So I designed an experiment to test that idea. So what we did is we had a high management system and a standard system. So with the standard system, you know, we added one factor at a time. One of those factors was fungicide and insecticide. The yield increase for just fungicide and insecticide in 2020 was 5.5 bushels per acre. And that's actually averaged over 4 locations. Each location is replicated 6 times. So there's a lot of data. That wasn't just a one-hit wonder.
That's pretty standard in the industry you hear anyway.
Yeah, I'd say it's a little bit on the big side, but nevertheless, we had a nice yield response in 2020, all right? But when you remove that factor from the high management system, now we had an 8.3 bushel yield loss. So that suggests that in a high management system, that fungicide and insecticide is even more important than in a standard management system. So I think that sums up what I've historically seen and thought is that if you're planting early, using full season cultivars, you know, you've got good soil test levels, you're applying fertilizer, you're using sulfur, you're creating a lot of yield potential. And it becomes more important to protect that yield potential at the end with fungicide insecticides.
Great, Jake. So farmers can do all of these things that we're suggesting today, but ultimately we know that Mother Nature is queen on this subject.
Yep,
so
yep.
When we look at Mother Nature, how can she make or break our game?
Yeah, Katie, you know, all farmers know that, you know, you need good soil moisture in the month of August to finish out the soybean crop. And it's really, really, really important. Actually, more important than most folks recognize. So, you know, we can do all these things and Mother Nature can still thwart our plans. So you need rain in August. The other thing that I actually studied again in my PhD work is what effect late season temperatures have on soybean yields. And what I found is that night temperatures have a big impact on soybean yields. Okay, so you actually want warmer nights than average in the month of August and through the middle of September. So if you have warmer nights in August and the middle of September than normal, that's really going to prop up soybean yields. All right, and to take it even a step further, we found that when you plant full season cultivars early and you plant full season cultivars in general, what do? You position that seed filling period later into the season. Well, if you have moisture and you have warm night temperatures, the combination of those two, that's really going to blow your soybean yields up. So not a lot you can do about it, but pray for a moist August and warmer than normal temperatures, you know, and at the end of August and September. And when you get those things combined with this management, you're going to really, really blow the bid.
Wow, Jake, we have really covered a ton of topics here today on management practices on how to increase our soybean yields. And as you can see from this slide that we're now showing on the screen, these are the lists that we just went through.
Yeah, you bet, Katie. And we all appreciate your time today and your business too.
Yes, and if you'd like to know anything more about soybeans and high yield, reach out to your Liqui-Grow sales representative or Jake or myself, and we'd sure be glad to help you out with that.
Thank you. Those were excellent presentations. Thanks for staying on. We're going to go into the Q&A portion now, but as a quick reminder, you can put your question in the chat. You can type it directly into the YouTube chat, which is below the presentation that you were viewing, below the screen. And then you can also send questions to questions@liqui-grow.com at any point. Okay, Jake and Katie, thanks for being here today. Let's get started on the first question. Are there any other management factors that I should consider besides those that were on your list?
Yeah, Lisa, I'll take that question.
Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if you were on the biological talk yesterday, you probably could answer that question yourself. And so yesterday I talked a lot about a product called NewTek SI. It is an Azospirillum brellicense bacteria, which causes increased root hair development in soybean and corn plants for that matter. But it also helps signal increased nodule production, more nodules that are more effective, which results in increased nitrogen uptake for soybean plants. So if there was one other thing that I didn't mention in our list today, NewTek SI would be definitely something I would try if I were a farmer. That can be applied in furrow. It can also be applied with spring suspensions. I'm looking at it as a seed treatment that is not commercially available yet, but I definitely have seen yield increases. More to come on that. If I were to position that in an environment for best success, it actually goes right along with our conversation. I have seen more consistent and larger yield increases in cold, wet planting conditions, where the beans struggle to emerge for sure. That's where I've seen the biggest yield increases. There was recently a meta-analysis that was published from Brazil that also suggests that cool no-till situations is where they see the largest and most consistent yield increases in Brazil with the same bacteria. So what that meta-analysis showed, in my personal experience here in Iowa, would align that early planting in cool, wet soils would definitely be a place where I believe you'd see more consistent and larger yield increases from a product like that. The opposite of that is full width tillage, very dry surface soils that may or may not be associated with late planting. But if you're a farmer who's still who works his ground before planting soybean, you may not see as consistent of yield increases with that product. So still getting some of that hashed out, but it sure seems to me like a no-till cold environments is the better bet.
Okay. Anything else you want to add, Katie?
No, I think Jake handled that well.
Okay, great. Okay, I have another question that has come through. If early planting is so important, why do I sometimes have the highest yields with late planting?
Katie, do you want that or do you want me to take it?
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, so through my, I've been talking about early planting soybean. I've been talking about it so long, I'm kind of getting tired of talking about it, Lisa, but I've often had farmers approach me and say, come on, man, I planted my soybean in June and I had 75 bushel soybeans. Sometimes I have the best soybeans I ever have when I plant late. I don't discount that or disbelieve that. When I referenced early planting, that gives you yield potential, gives you the opportunity to accumulate yield. But if we have a late rain event, like toward the end of August, when the early planted soybeans have begun to senesce, that's going to overcome a lot. It's going to overcome a lot, and your later planted soybeans can yield more than your earlier planted ones. But on average, that is clearly not the case.
Okay.
And unfortunately, in agronomy, we have to play the averages because we can't predict the weather. If we could predict the weather, it would be a game changer, but we can't. I mean, the weathermen can't even, get 2 days ahead, right? Let alone 6 months, right? So.
Okay, good. I have another question coming over the email right now. Jake, is there a difference are there different kinds of sulfur to use in crops, or are they all the same?
They are definitely not all the same. I'm going to talk about, there's several formulations of sulfur out there. I'm going to talk about the two that are most legitimate or work
Okay.
the best, are going to give farmers the best ROI. That is ammonium thiosulfate. That's a liquid sulfur source, and that's the sulfur source that we use.
Okay.
There's also ammonium sulfate. It is a dry source, and ATS and AMS are very similar. Elemental sulfur is another dry source that is not a great source of nitrogen to use because it is extremely, extremely, extremely slow release. So slow release that it cannot meet the crop's needs when the crop needs it. That is also found in MES, a microessentials product. And I know they promote slow release sulfur, and that's great, but the truth is it's too slow release. And there's been scientific studies that have investigated this, independent of Liqui-Grow or Mosaic or anybody else. And if you're a farmer and you question that, call me up. We'll talk about it. I'll got plenty of evidence to support that.
Okay. I have another question from the email. I have heard to obtain high yielding soybeans, you need to use nitrogen. Is this accurate? And if so, how much and by what method of application?
You want me to take that, Katie?
Yeah, go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, this is near and dear to my heart. I have looked at nitrogen on soybeans so much that's not even funny. And what I can tell you is, yeah, you can often get a yield increase by applying nitrogen fertilizer to soybean, but it's often a bushel or two, and it often is not economical. So the answer is yes, but it's not economical, so don't do it. And this can get really drawn out. All I'm going to say for now is that slow release nitrogen sources tend to be the best nitrogen source to use for soybean.
Okay.
But slow release nitrogen sources are expensive. So why not use a biological product like NewTek SI that is also a slow release nitrogen source and is way less expensive than actual slow release nitrogen? That's the idea behind this NewTek SI biological product is that it fixes a little bit of atmospheric nitrogen. It also helps the soybean crop nodulate harder, and the nodules work more effectively to give the soybean crop more nitrogen. So yes, soybeans are often nitrogen limited, but nitrogen fertilizer is not economically the answer. It appears that a biological product that fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere is probably the more economical answer. There'll be a lot to come on that in the years to come, I'm sure. But
Jake, I have a follow-up question on that. As the nodules start to give out in that R4, R5, time frame, is that when you would be thinking about putting a nitrogen on? And can we be putting in biologicals on at that time, or are your biologicals up front good enough for that late into the season?
Katie, nodulation does start to wane at R5 or so. But contrary to that, folks, including myself, have looked at in-season. We've looked at nitrogen timing on soybean, in-season, pre-plant, all different timings throughout the season in soybean. And we actually find that at planting applications tend to be the best, surprisingly. We think about nodulation giving out too early, but I think in reality, we're learning that maybe nodulation doesn't get started heavy enough, fast enough in some cases. And that's why these early planting cool conditions, we could see, more benefits from a biological product that fixes nitrogen. So it doesn't make complete sense, but that's clearly what the research points to. Great question.
Okay. Next question. Do the extend beans or the enlist beans yield more? You want
me to handle that one, Jake?
Have at it.
So just out of my last couple of years here walking beans and being out in the combines, I think that each set of traits has its own high yielding soybean. So as you look inside of the trait platform that you choose, that's probably where you want to be looking for your highest yielding beans. And then don't forget not only the Extend, but then the Extend Flex that's now being offered. And the Extend Flex does seem to be yielding higher on average in the state of Iowa. I think the data said like 1.2 bushels than the entire Extend lineup when you do lineup to lineup. So I think the big key there is they both have their high yielding options. You just want to make sure you're looking inside of each trade platform that works for you.
Okay, and then a follow-up question. I actually got 2 questions about this topic. What seed treatments are we recommending for the 2021 season?
Jake, did you want me to handle that or you want to?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll start. I'm sure you'll have a follow-up for this. So for the seed treatments, we have different levels of seed treatment available for different customer bases of whatever we need. We also have different manufacturers that we're working with to be able to work with whatever program you're set up to be. So if you're with a certain manufacturer, because of whatever you're doing chemical wise, we're able to offer that seed treatment as well. Clearly our best Cadillac type program is the one that I think we probably need to stay on course with if we're looking for these high yielding beans. And Jake, I'm sure you're going to want to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I will give you a general comment about that, and I mentioned in the video. I think if you're going to make a serious effort to maximize soybean yield potential, like we talked this entire presentation, I wouldn't skimp on the seed treatments. I would make sure we're protecting roots. Remember, early planting is going to require more water, more nutrients, and to take those up, you have to have healthy roots. And I was just telling some salesman the other day in a training that we don't have any understanding, we don't have a very good understanding of just how susceptible soybean roots are to diseases. You ought to go dig up soybean roots sometime in the middle of the season, wash them off. If they're not white, they're infected with diseases. Getting those soybeans off to a good start and making sure they have the energy to protect themselves and getting that rooting going is really important. So I wouldn't skimp on the seed treatments. I would also, on the quality of the seed treatment, I would also say that I lost my train of thought. My phone was ringing.
That's okay.
You mentioned the level of quality, and that's something, Jake, all of our seed treatments that we have today have probably 4 fungicides in it, at least 1 insecticide in it. And then, we're offering up the Olivo package to add on to all of those as well.
Thank you, Katie. That's correct. And you reminded me of my last point. Do you use a fungicides and an insecticide and Olivo, or do you just use the fungicides? This is unfortunately one of the things that I have a hard time explaining, as well as anybody else who you may ask. And if they have the answer for you, call me and let me know. But we often see a yield increase when we put the fungicide and insecticide seed treatments together. In other words, we get better profits when we put the fungicide and insecticides together on soybeans. And I've had farmers tell me, well, come on, Jake, there's not that many insects out there that are killing seedling soybean. We plant 150 anyway. Who cares if we lose 5,000 or 6,000 plants per acre? And I rationalize with that. But there's something happening where the two are important. There's some very good academic university independent studies that show that very clearly. I think it has something to do with, I think it more often has something to do with vectoring diseases from insects, like soybean mosaic virus, but that's a long discussion. And that's only speculation.
Okay. I do have a question from the YouTube chat. Since early planting is key, the risk for a spring frost is higher. How severe does damping off from a frost have to be before we think about replant? Is the risk worth the reward?
Boy, I think was that last year, Jake, or the year before, we put a lot of beans in the ground early and then we had that frost come through in the north.
Yes. Yeah. The answer is yes. The risk is worth the reward. I mean, I think we have to be smart. I think we have to be smart, but the risk is worth the reward. Thankfully, soybeans are very plastic in their yield potential. You can lose quite a few plants and still maintain pretty good. You can still maintain pretty good yield potential. And really you need to have more than about 80,000 plants per acre out there to maximize yield. We plant way more than that because we can lose them for a lot of reasons: diseases, crusting, frost, insects, diseases, interactions between some of these herbicidal compounds are pretty hard on them at times. But we need to have about 80,000 plants per acre out there, and we're going to maximize yield. I also might add that we often find that the economic optimum seeding rate is not as high with early planting. So you can lose a few more and still be okay. And the reason that is think about it, you have more plants out there, they have a longer time to get bigger, and they close the canopy sooner. So if you have a longer time to make every plant larger, you need fewer plants.
Okay. Thank you. I have another question here. This might be for you, Jake. Where is the best response with biological use in soybeans, high yield or low yield environments?
Yeah, I kind of covered that a little bit, but it's a good question. I guess if I'm generalizing with my experience in corn, it'd be more stressful and or water limited environments or nutrient limited environments would be my general answer to that question. That being said, I've tested a lot of biological products in soybean, and with the exception of one product, NewTek SI, the answer is neither. Because I haven't had profitable yield increases except for with NewTek SI and soybean. But thinking about the way biological products should work and are supposed to work and how we believe they will work in the future, the answer is probably would tend to be in more stressful environments. I think in a lot of cases we get 60 bushel soybeans, and that's not a super stressful environment, but it kind of is because we know we can get 80 bushel soybean. But if we could turn that 60 bushel soybean into 65 bushel soybean more routinely, that's kind of where we want to be. And I think that's where biologicals are going to help.
Okay, good. Thank you.
At some point in time.
Yes. Okay, thanks. This might be best for Katie. Which soybean trait package will have the highest yield potential?
So I think we kind of covered that maybe a bit ago with that extend enlist.
Anything you want to add or?
Yeah, we didn't talk about the LLGT27 platform. That is another option that we do sell quite a bit of. And inside the LLGT27 platform, we've got quite a few high yielding options as well. So the best thing to do is probably reach out to your Liqui-Grow salesman and see what they've got in their territory. We're pretty far spread out. So what's working best in their territory, or send me an email after this. I can help you with that.
Okay, great. And we did talk about this one as well, but just in case there's anything else you guys want to add in, why have we seen the shorter maturity beans yielding as well as the longer season beans in the past few years?
Are you planting early? I mean, that's the first thing I would ask you, because if you looked at some of that data, which I know went by rather fast, I encourage you to go back and look at it. When you plant in the middle of May or later, short season beans and the full season beans pretty much yield the same. So if you're not planting early, or if there's a season where you can't plant early, don't expect there to be a big yield difference between the early and full beans. It's really when you have the opportunity to plant early, do we see a bigger. The full season beans have more yield potential on average.
Okay.
That doesn't mean you're going to get it. The other thing is, we can't just think about maturity. We have to think about the raw yield potential of any given variety. Okay. So that's going to be confounded in there and going to make it hard to separate things sometimes. I'll give you an example. When I was with DuPont Pioneer several years ago, we had some very good varieties in the late 2s, and we had a big hole in the early 3s, and we had very good varieties in the mid 3s. So sometimes there's a hole with different companies that can make you believe, the early beans are the best. Well, maybe that's specific to a company.
Okay. Let me check and make sure. I think we've wrapped up most of the questions.
Lisa, if there's not one more question, if there's not any more questions, there's a question I want to expand on a little bit.
Go ahead, because we have gotten through all of the questions now. So the floor is yours.
One of the questions that was asked was, is the risk worth the reward for planting soybean early?
Yes.
And I generically said the answer is yes. And I'd like you, if you're a farmer or salesman, to think about this kind of a little bit here. So, what do we know about yield potential in corn? What kind of stand do we want to have? Katie, why don't you chime in and help them out if they don't know? What kind of stand do we want to have in corn?
100% stand.
We want to have a good stand, but what else do we want that stand to be? We want it to be even
Even
and emerge at the
at the
same
same
time.
time within probably 12 hours, 10, 12 hours.
And we want a picket fence stand. What happens when we plant early or too early? What happens to the shape of our stand? Not only final plant population, but is it often
We
uneven?
find- Yeah, we find even if the seeds aren't put in the ground the exact same direction, they'll come out of the ground 12, 15, 20, couple days apart, just because of
Yep,
weather.
Okay.
right. So when we plant into very stressful, cold, nasty conditions with corn, we oftentimes lose plants and we oftentimes get an uneven stand, and that hurts corn yield potential. Soybean are actually the opposite. Soybean, we can lose 5, 10, 20,000 plants per acre on average, isn't going to affect yield potential.
Okay.
Soybean don't have to emerge on the same day because they're very they have a lot of yield plasticity. Neighbors can take advantage of small plants. We don't have to have a picket fence stand in soybean at all, and research shows that very definitively. So if you're gonna talk about risk in early planting, I would argue quite intensely that early planting corn too early is much more risky than planting soybean too early, because you don't have to have a perfect stand. And soybean are just as frost tolerant as corn is. That's a misnomer that they're more susceptible to frost. They're not.
Anything you want to add, Katie?
So Jake's very researchy, and I probably just have a lot more life experiences of working with farmers for the last 12 to 15 years. So this might not come off with as many statistics, but I did work with a farmer in spring that had this issue. It was crusting. And when we got all said and done, the population was somewhere around 80 to 85,000. And he decided to replant half the farm. And then I said, hey, maybe on this half the farm, we should just let it go. So he went ahead and put in more beans on the other side, hoping to get to that 160-ish, I think at the time. My side was more of the 80, 85. And when the combine went to roll, they were the same yield. So just kind of trying to verify what Jake's saying on that yield thing, they can really compensate for a loss of plant population. And Jake, you do a little bit of research on that, so we can do some demo work too, to when we walk through and do our training with our sales team too. So for the sales team out there, we'll be sure to get you out into those plots this next year.
Yeah, and Katie, I want to temper it a little bit, and we don't want to try to lose soybean population.
No.
Those little soybean seeds have become quite expensive, but when and if it happens, it's usually not the end of the world.
Okay. Good. That was great. Thanks for adding that last bit in. I think that was very informational. Okay, so that's it. I do not have any other questions coming through. This was a great session. I want to thank everyone who logged on this morning for the session. If you think of a question after the fact, something pops into your mind, you can always reach out to your Liqui-Grow retail location and your sales rep, but the email will still be live as well, ongoing. So questions@liqui-grow.com. You can submit questions and we'll get back to you. Also, we really want to see you next week. So like I said, we have 2 live panel discussions. We will be filming live at our location in DeWitt, Iowa. We have some experts coming in to talk about the ag economy, agronomy developments, what's hot, buzz topics, and it'll be the full session will be Q&A. So they'll have some topics they're chatting about, and then we'll be taking questions the whole time. So anything you want to ask is on the table. And then we will have another session that's more economic focused. So we have an outside participant coming in. Excellent. He's going to give a great presentation. And this is more just about the state of the economy, the US economy, the global economy, things that are happening throughout the country and throughout the world that could have potential impact on us here in the Midwest. and just a really good economic overview and outlook for all of you who are watching, who are running a business. So those are on Tuesday, the 23rd at 9 a.m. and Thursday, the 25th at 9 a.m. And we really hope to see you there. And again, the full schedule's on our website and showing at the end of this presentation. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.